Welcome to the National Security Alert, brought to you by the Citizens Commission on National Security. Now here's your host, Roger Aronoff.
Thank you, Don Smith, our great producer. I want to welcome you all to our new series of video podcasts called the National Security Alert. I am the Executive Director and Editor of the Citizens Commission on National Security, our website being CC for Citizens Commission, nationalsecurity.org. And I urge you to go there. We have a great series of articles, interviews you'll find. And we're going to be putting these shows on the website, and there's a lot of video up there already. So I want to give you a little background and what we're planning to do here. We are entering the marketplace of ideas to bring you some of the hard truths about the issues that are affecting America's national security today. We're talking about foreign policy, hostile adversaries, as well as domestic policies that clearly threaten our national security. And so this is going to be what the show is. But we also have other things that are in the works, other shows, other events that we will be talking about in the near future. But let me first tell you how this got started. And it was really about Benghazi. But what happened is when I was the editor of Accuracy in Media, we were watching how the hearings were going, the congressional hearings, and the board from the State Department that was attempting to look into this, but none of them were really getting to it. And there were like 7 different committees that were looking into it. And I had interviewed Admiral Ace Lyons for a show I was doing at the time, a series of audio podcasts. And Ace was talking about Benghazi, and then soon I had the chance to meet him in person, and I brought up the idea of forming a citizens commission to investigate this. And at the same event were 2 generals, an Air Force and an Army general, Paul Vallely, the Army general, and Tom McInerney, the Air Force general. So with the 3 of them, we formed this, and we reached out to a number of other people, including our guest today, who I now want to introduce to you. And she is the perfect person. We're going to do a lightning round today and cover a number of mainly foreign situations, international situations that we really want to look at, and we're going to get into them, but kind of briefly today. But over the course of the next year, 2 years, however long this continues on, we're going to really keep pounding away. But so let me tell you about our guest here today. Clare Lopez. Don, there you go. Clare is the founder of Lopez Liberty LLC, with a mission to alert and educate Americans on a range of national security threats, international as well as from the Islamic movement, Muslim Brotherhood, and collaborators among the ranks of Marxist communists in this country. From 2014 to 2020, Lopez served as vice president for research and analysis at the Center for Security Policy. She has been a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research and a member of the board of advisors for the Canadian Mackenzie Institute. In 2016, she was named to Senator Ted Cruz's presidential campaign National Security Advisory Team. She provides expertise as an instructor on Iran, Hezbollah, and the Red-Green Axis for Understanding the Threat, a nationwide training program for federal, state, and local agencies and the private sector on the global Islamic movement and jihad networks. Her latest appointment is as a senior advisory board member of the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement. From 2013 to 2016, Lopez served as a member of the Citizens Commission on Benghazi and continues among the members of its successor organization, the Citizens Commission on National Security. Formerly vice president of the Intelligence Summit, she was a career operations officer with the CIA. She completed Marine Corps Officer Candidate School in Quantico, Virginia, before declining a military commission to join the CIA. There's a lot more, and I urge you to read the rest of her bio at our website, again, ccnationalsecurity.org. But I want to start by revisiting how Clare and I became associates, as I was mentioning before. It was the issue of Benghazi. Don, first clip
Tuesday
there,
night
please.
at the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, a complex and highly dangerous situation. Outside, an anti-American protest. Then, a group of heavily armed militants, approximately 24 of them, launched an attack firing rocket-propelled grenades.
So when we talk about Benghazi and then the reports that we did, and they're all up on our site, you'll see a tab that says Benghazi, and it has all of our press conferences, our reports. Clare was really the main author of the reports, but we looked at it as a series of scandals. First, getting into the war in Libya, why we did that in the first place. Then you had the issue of supplying weapons to Al-Qaeda. Then you had the issue of providing the security in Benghazi for the special mission compound and the CIA annex nearby. Then fourth, you had the day of, and why we failed to respond accordingly to the attacks. And then you had the cover-up, the lies about what really was going on that day, and the media protecting Obama as it was just 2 months before the presidential election. And here we are 2 months before the 10-year anniversary of Benghazi. Clare, why don't you say what are the points that stand out to you and talk about, in particular, the presidential directive that still we have not seen.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Roger, for having me as your guest on this inaugural edition of this podcast. I'm really honored to be a part of the Citizens Commission on National Security and to join you here on the video. Well, as you say, we first began working together in 2013 on the Benghazi issue. As you say, you'd already brought together Generals Vallely and McInerney, as well as retired Admiral Ace Lyons, whom we dearly miss, sorely miss. And then built out the Citizens Commission on Benghazi from that start. And I was fortunate enough to be among the number that you brought into the group, which eventually grew into quite a team. And we began doing a lot of research, all open source research, and eventually issued 2 reports. The first one came out in 2014, and the second, the final report on Benghazi, we issued in June of 2016. That one really is the most comprehensive of our research on the topic. So what really began, I guess, to lay the framework, to establish the framework for the entire issue of what happened in Benghazi in North Africa in 2011 into 2012 was something called PSD 11, Presidential Study Directive 11. Apparently, the best we can tell, issued from the Obama administration in about, I think it was August of 2010, the year before. And although the PSD 11 remains classified, from leaks and commentary analysis about what people believe it was, it was the Obama administration's policy position on the Muslim Brotherhood. And that position, that policy aimed to enable and empower the Muslim Brotherhood across North Africa, meaning Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and to overthrow our existing partnerships in these countries led by Tunisian leader Ben Ali, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, and eventually perhaps would have in Syria as well with Bashar al-Assad, but that is separated from North Africa, although there is a connection. And that PSD-11 apparently took the position that the Muslim Brotherhood would be a more popularly based organization to lead and rule these North African countries. I should maybe add right here at this point that it was at the same time that the Obama-Biden, at that time Vice President, administration was enabling and empowering the Muslim Brotherhood right here at home, domestically, literally to have appointed and senior positions within the Obama administration's various agencies and organizations. But back to North Africa, the uprising, as it was called then, the Arab Spring, was of course no such thing. It was hardly Arab, really, and it was not a spring. Beginning in late 2010 in Tunisia, what kicked it off was an uprising in Tunisia against the ruler Ben Ali, spread to Libya, spread to Egypt, but backed behind the scenes, backed and supported with direct involvement and certainly also training. Behind it all was the Obama administration. And as things progressed and the violence rose and rose across these various North African countries, it became a very serious situation, at least in particular for those three countries. Again, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt. These were our longtime allies who ruled these places. They weren't choir boys by any stretch of the imagination, but they kept a lid on jihadist organizations like Al-Qaeda, like the Muslim Brotherhood, and they managed to maintain a kind of, I don't want to say peace, but at least a reasonable situation for those three countries. Well, all of that, gets overthrown in the next year and beyond. This is what our investigation looked into, particularly focusing on Libya.
Let me bring up something here. One of the things that I liked about this is it's sort of the field of dreams theory, that you build it and they will come. And one of the things we got, for instance, Admiral Chuck Kubik, who had been an admiral during the Iraq War of the early 2000s. And then he stayed behind and he was doing projects in Libya, like building bridges and engineering type projects. And he was approached by Gaddafi's people to basically offer that he would leave the country under a white flag of truce. And so Kubik delivered that message to the US government, first through AFRICOM, and then got back to the White House, as we discovered, and they just ignored it and instead went to war, really under false pretenses. So that was one thing. And there were others, that we became close with. The 13 Hours guys who wrote the book and told the story about what happened that day, Mark Turry. So everyone came to us really as the central place where they could really tell the truth about what happened. And so our report, titled how the US switched sides in the war on terror. Take it from there, Claire. And first, before you do that, Don, go ahead and play another clip. 1 second, Claire. Don?
American and Libyan security personnel, officials say, were forced to fight on two fronts. The attackers on the outside, the fire inside. Diplomatic sources are beginning to piece together what happened next. Officials tell CNN Ambassador Chris Stevens in Benghazi on a short visit from the capital, Tripoli, along with Sean Smith, a 10-year veteran of the State Department in Libya on temporary assignment, took refuge in a safe room along with a lead security officer.
Go ahead, Claire. Tell
So
about
in 2011, Chris Stevens was ambassador to Tripoli, Libya, and his job took him not just to Tripoli, but to Benghazi, which was the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood uprising in alliance, of course, with Al-Qaeda against Muammar Gaddafi. And Chris Stevens essentially became America's first envoy to Al-Qaeda. And he worked closely with the rebels, with the insurgents, with the Muslim Brotherhood jihadis and Al-Qaeda. The Muslim Brotherhood had its role mostly in a overarching or a government security position, while Al-Qaeda were the on-the-ground militias that actually carried out the violence. And it was Chris Stevens' job to coordinate, for example, arms shipments that the United States government arranged to be sent to a central, I guess, collection point in the United Arab Emirates or Qatar? Which one? Qatar, right? In Qatar.
I think that's right,
And
yes.
from there, the weapons were then shipped on over through the Mediterranean to be delivered to the rebels, to the Al-Qaeda militias in Benghazi. And Chris Stevens' role was directly to meet those ships bringing in the weapons and supervise the distribution of weapons to Al-Qaeda militias in order to overthrow our theretofore ally, Muammar Gaddafi, who had not only kept, a lid on the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda in Libya, but he actually had taken back detainees released from Gitmo, Al-Qaeda detainees who were Libyan, released from Gitmo on the promise, which he kept, of putting them in Libyan jails to serve their sentence. So he was in every way an ally and a supporter of the United States government's war on terror, as it was called at the time.
Right. He also had given up his WMD, particularly his nuke ambitions right after Saddam was captured. So let me just go to our website, hit the tab Benghazi, and you'll see the reports. We put together the best narrative on this, goes into the detail, and I think really far exceeded even what the select committee did. Trey Gowdy, we were very excited originally, but at the end he just said, here's 800 pages, read it for yourself and come to your own conclusion. Well, we've connected the dots. We lay it out in a very easy to understand narrative. So we're going to move on. As I call this a lightning round, this is kind of slow to begin with, but let's pick it up from here. The next, and this ties in because as you talked about, the Obama policy was to empower the Muslim Brotherhood across North Africa. Then you had Iran, and to empower them in their region of the country, of the world, the Levant through the Middle East there. And Don, you want to play? Do you have a clip there, or what do we have? Just the picture there. So why don't you there's so much to talk about Iran, but for the current threat, I think it's the Biden administration determination to get back into this JCPOA, to give them $100 billion to do whatever. And it just seems crazy how desperately we seem to want to get back into this deal. What's the
Well, I
matter with
think,
that?
right. I think what this goes back to is the Biden or the Obama administration, during which, of course, current President Joe Biden was the vice president, and a kind of as I see it, a kind of a desire to do a balancing act, if you will. North Africa would be given over to the Sunnis, the Muslim Brotherhood jihadis. The central heartland of the Middle East would be given over to the Shiites, the ruling force since the 1979 revolution in Iran. And certainly part of that played out during the Obama administration with the fanatically single-minded drive to achieve this joint comprehensive plan of action completed in July of 2015, under which the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, that's US, UK, France, Russia, and China, together with the +1, that's Germany, and of course, Iran itself, and the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, the monitoring body of the United Nations for nuclear programs around the world, together in Vienna achieved this agreement. By the way, no signature was ever written, no signature on any page of it. Anyway, it was an agreement. And supposedly it was going to limit Iran's drive to a deliverable nuclear weapon. Well, of course, it did no such thing, and they knew it from the beginning that it wouldn't, certainly because it was known from at least August of 2002, when the Iranian democratic opposition group, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, and its key member, the People's Mujahideen of Iran, PMOI, held press conferences and basically revealed for the first time publicly the Iranian clandestine nuclear weapons program, showing satellite photography of places like Natanz, the enrichment facility, and other places, with more revelations that followed on and continue to this day. So the world at that point, including the P5+1 and the IAEA, knew that Iran was driving for achievement of a deliverable nuclear weapon clandestinely. And they pretended there was no clandestine program, but that the JCPOA, now we're back to 2015, would enable monitoring of known sites by the IAEA, and we would just forget about any investigation or inspection of sites that the Iranian regime said were off limits or not available for the IAEA inspectors to go look. Well, where would you put your nuclear weapons program? But that was the JCPOA. And then, of course, during the Trump administration, President Donald Trump, realizing that the Iranians were cheating and had been cheating from the get-go, took the United States out of the agreement in May of 2018. Fast forward then a few years to where we are now in 2022, and the Biden administration wants nothing more than to reverse every single decision the Trump administration ever took, no matter the negative consequences for the region, the world, our foremost ally in the Middle East area, Israel, and the United States itself, and is trying as hard as it can, the Biden administration, to get us back into that agreement somehow, some way, even though the fact of the matter is that Iran has now moved so far beyond the provisions of that agreement, never mind of the much earlier nuclear non-proliferation treaty, violating every provision therein, in terms of enrichment to a certain percentage, which was supposed to be 3.67% under the JCPOA. It's up to at least 60% now. Amount of enriched uranium, types and advanced models of centrifuges that would be allowed to be used and installed in places like Natanz and Fordo. The milling of uranium metal that would make the pit, as it were, the two hemispheres of a nuclear bomb, on and on and on, violated every one of these. There's no way, bottom line, to go back to the JCPOA, but the Biden administration nevertheless seems determined to grant any and every concession it can possibly offer up on bended knee to get ourselves back into it. But the Iranians, they know where they're at in the nuclear program. They don't need the US back in the deal, except they would like to have more of the sanctions removed, yes, which would bring them a financial windfall. But they're so far along with their clandestine nuclear weapons program, which Israel and the MEK probably know best, that it hardly matters really if we go back to the JCPOA or not. But we're reaching a crisis point, and I think Israel probably understands that better than anyone else, as they are the number one target in the bullseye for the Iranian regime.
We'll get to Israel shortly, but so one of the remaining issues appears to be the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and do we keep them as on the terrorist list? And but you have to wonder, is all this really just kind of a staged charade leading to the breakthrough when they finally come to terms and everyone agrees that, you know, we're back in the JCPOA, so we've once again deterred Iran from building their nukes, you know, regardless. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the talks that have been going on literally for years in Vienna, these nuclear talks. Oh, by the way, the United States was not even directly involved in the talks at the same table, in the same room where these talks are being held. The Iranians told them, no, you can't sit here. You have to go sit out in the hallway, or maybe it was a room across the hallway. And instead, the United States agreed to use a Russian diplomat as our interlocutor for the talks with the Iranians.
Right at the same time that the war, right at the same time the war was starting in Ukraine.
At the same time, yeah. But those talks have been on again, off again, running up against these various sticking points for a long time. Indeed, the listing of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, on the U.S. State Department's Foreign Terrorist Organizations list, removal from that list was one of the Iranian demands. Another was the sanctions ever since the beginning of time would be lifted against them. And the U.S., though, in a way, to its credit, had a couple of return demands. One of those was that the Iranians would ended their quest to avenge the killing of then commander of the Quds Force, a unit of the IRGC, Major General Qasem Soleimani, in January of 2020 under the Trump administration. And the Iranians have vowed revenge ever since then with a direct, explicit, named intent to assassinate former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and others. That was a U.S. demand that we have not given up yet, and that's to their credit. Nor has the Biden administration agreed to remove the IRGC from the FTO list. So to their credit also. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes, but at the moment it doesn't look like the talks are going anywhere.
Okay, so let's move on. You brought up Israel as being the threatened the most directly by Iran. And this is something that, you know, Trump, who really became the greatest friend Israel had, according to many people, myself included, see that when he finally moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He finally, after really giving the Palestinians every opportunity to come to the table and be richly rewarded for reaching a two-state agreement, he saw they really didn't have any interest in it as they turned it down for the seventh or eighth time, however you want to look at it. And he finally said, you know, all right, you're irrelevant to this. So we're going to create the Abraham Accords, and where he made peace. I mean, he brought together a number of Gulf nations that started doing business with Israel, opening diplomatic relations. But yet Iran is still hovering there as this major threat, constantly threatening to wipe Israel off the map. So, Don, give us a clip of Israel here, please. Okay, Claire, so what do you think about Israel? You've been over there in recent years and looked at the situation on the ground and all the hot spots there. Tell us about the security of Israel and the relationship between Israel and the U.S. and give us your 5-minute take on this.
Okay. So, I mean, the first thing to understand is that Jew hatred is doctrinal to the Islamic faith. It goes as far back as Muhammad himself. It is replete in references throughout the Quran itself. It is obligatory for the faithful, devout followers and practitioners of Islam to seek the destruction of the Jewish people, and now, of course, the Jewish state of Israel. And Iran's regime faithfully, devoutly follows this doctrine of Islam, although many others do not, and we are very happy about that. So the relationships among Israel and the various Arab neighbors around it, in particular the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, we're talking here about Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and others, really has a long history. It goes back a long time, but for a long time it was quiet. The academic exchanges, the commercial exchanges, technology exchanges, that went on behind the scenes and quietly for a long time before President Trump in May of 2017 made his first overseas trip to Riyadh, to Saudi Arabia, and recognized what had in fact been ongoing between the Israelis and the Saudis, to be sure, and these other countries. And there, I think, was launched what would eventually blossom into the Abraham Accords, under which Israel and 4 countries eventually, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, eventually Sudan, and also Morocco, formally entered into full diplomatic relations with Israel. And it's understood that behind the scenes, this would not ever have even happened without the encouragement and the backing of Saudi Arabia. They have not quite themselves joined the Abraham Accords yet. The current king, Salman, is not in favor, as we understand it, but the crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who will inherit the kingdom when his elderly father, who is not in the best of health, is no longer king. It is understood that there's a good chance that the Saudis also will join formally the Abraham Accords. And that's all to say that there is a kind of a practicality, a pragmatism now bringing these countries together with Israel. It's not about disowning Islam or, somehow moving away from their faith. Not at all. This is pragmatism in the face of what they all view, Israel and the rest of them, view as an existential threat from a rapidly nuclearizing Iranian regime, and also a regime that has deployed Islamic Jihad terror proxies all around the region in an effort, if you think of the geography, to surround not just Israel, but the Arabian Peninsula itself. Think of Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, come around across the Gulf is Iran itself, continue clockwise, you've got Yemen, where the Iranian proxies, the Houthis, have attacked Saudi Arabia itself, have attacked the United Arab Emirates, and then, of course, the proxy forces of the Iranian regime that the Quds Force of the IRGC command inside of Iraq, sometimes called the Hashd-e-Shabi, or the popular military units, which are proxies, terror proxies of Iran. So all of this taken together has really sobered up, you might say, these Gulf Cooperation Council countries, the Sunni neighbors that are now reaching out to Israel to strengthen those ties we talked about before, the academic ties, water conservation and water management, technology, medical technology, every other kind of technology exchange you can think of that had been going on quietly behind the scenes for a long time, now moving into a more public phase with the Abraham Accords, but they're doing it for a pragmatic reason, because they feel themselves, all of them, and of course Israel, squarely in the bullseye target for the Iranian regime.
Great
Well,
analysis.
I should add one more thing, one quick more thing, and that is that these countries in particular, also Saudi Arabia, really need foreign investment to develop their economies, to diversify their economies away from purely extractive industry, oil and gas and so forth, and to diversify into more and other modern technologies. They need that foreign investment and foreign exchange of experts to do that. And that also, I think, is bringing them all together with Israel.
So I want to mention that on our website, Israel, it's a very frequently visited subject. We did a 5.5-hour live event on JBS, Jewish Broadcast Service, that the whole thing is up on our website. You can see it. We brought a number of experts in. We have a lot of articles on the website about that from Clare, from Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, from Steve Emerson, one of our members who is the head of the investigative project on terrorism. And you can see all of that on our website, and we hope you will take a look at that right there when you come to the homepage. Secondly, I want to, next, we're going to move on to the next topic, which is the war in Ukraine right now, which started back on February 24th when Russia finally started invading. The sanctions that Joe Biden had assured us were going to deter Russia. And then after they didn't, he said no one ever thought sanctions would deter Russia. So, but here they are now, 4 months later, still going strong. And Claire, and just in the last couple of days, it's really seemed to intensify. In Russia, they call, just as the members of parliament or their governing body were leaving for the summer recess, they were called back, leading to speculation that they're about to really ramp up the war. And Russia's saying, if anyone thinks, we're going away, forget about it. And really the rhetoric's been heated. So Claire, give us your take on where this is and where this is headed and what you think should happen here.
Well, to set the scene, first of all, Vladimir Putin, the ruler of Russia, sees his role as recreating perhaps the Soviet Union, or as much of it as he can, or even the Russian Empire, his namesake, or maybe he's the namesake of Vladimir of Rus, who in 988 converted to Christianity, brought the Ukrainian people with him into Christianity. The cradle of Russian civilization is Kiev. Ukrainian people as a people with a nationhood, with a sense of culture and civilization of their own, predates the Russian people by quite a lot. Nevertheless, Putin believes that the worst catastrophe of his lifetime was the 1991 breakup of the Soviet Union. And I think he sees it as his mission in life, his crusade even, to reestablish that and forcibly to bring back, as he would see it, Ukraine into the broader mother Russia. As the USSR broke up and these nations, many of them former republics of the USSR, broke off, became independent, including Ukraine, Putin viewed that as a disaster, as a catastrophe. And as soon as he got the ability to do so, he began to chip away and try to bring back whatever he could of that former empire, if you will, that the USSR once had commanded. He took advantage of perceived weaknesses, periods of weakness in the United States government. Back in 2008, when he moved into separatist areas of Georgia in the Caucasus, when he pounded the capital of Chechnya in the Caucasus, Grozny, to smithereens. Later on, in 2014, during the Obama administration again, moving in to take back Crimea, which was historically, since the time of Catherine the Great, yes, a part of Russia. She had freed it from the grip of the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish jihadis. Took back Crimea nevertheless. It's the site of the Sevastopol Russian Navy outpost on the Black Sea, the only warm water port that Russia has. And then moving on, Putin set his sights on slicing off the eastern region of Ukraine called the Donbass, which comprises two oblasts. Those are something like provinces, let's say, Donetsk and Luhansk, and really has been at war. Russia has been at war with Ukraine to peel off that eastern region from Ukraine proper since 2014, to try to separate it and bring it under Russian control. So warfare has been going on, open warfare between Ukraine and Russia since 2014. That's 8 years now. So again, during a period of perceived weakness, once more, with the Biden administration in the United States, Putin saw his chance again. And as you say, Roger, back in February of this year, 2022, launched an all-out assault against Ukraine, failed to take the capital city of Kiev, failed to take other targets up until now, at least, like Kharkiv, the second largest city of Ukraine, but did pound away at the Donbass, continues to do that, and also achieved a top goal for Russia, which was in the south. As you may think about the geography in the south, Crimea, a peninsula off of Ukraine, is not directly connected geographically by land to Russia. It borders, though, on the Sea of Azov, and it is that strip of land across the Sea of Azov that Putin was determined to take, and that is why the Russian army pounded the city of Mariupol into absolute rubble. Now, moving out from the Sea of Azov through the Strait of Kerch into the Black Sea, the Russians are now setting their sights on the strip of land that would connect Ukraine to Moldova and to Romania. There is also a strip of eastern Moldova that the Russians claim as a separatist region. It's called the Transnistria, meaning Trans-Dniester, the river. And that strip has been in contention, with Russia claiming it as a separatist region for a long time too. But you can see then why Russia would want to connect again another strip of land bordering now on the Black Sea to reach Moldova, and eventually Romania.
Let me ask you. Let me ask you.
However,
Let me ask. Let me ask you a question here.
yeah,
So President Biden would have us believe that he has united NATO completely in fully supporting Ukraine. Yet you hear from Zelensky that he said he's grateful for all the support he's getting, but yet he says it's not coming fast enough. And for instance,
right.
that 40 billion that was passed in our Congress, and it for over a month, not a penny of it went there. And so how much? And the other factor is that Germany and Europe are still buying Russian gas at these new huge prices. So we have far more financed the Russian side of the war than we have the Ukraine side of the war.
Well,
But yet,
no, not quite, not quite. I
ahead.
think one of the biggest miscalculations of Putin and Russia has been their expectation that a disunified NATO pre-invasion would splinter even more under the assault, under the invasion. And quite the opposite has happened. NATO has unified in a way perhaps none of us expected. It's been amazing to watch, including even now Germany. And we see, of course, the Baltic states, which themselves feel very threatened, despite being members of NATO now, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. And we see Finland and Sweden applying and being accepted as applicants, anyway, to join NATO. I think none of this was expected by Putin or the Kremlin prior to the invasion. It's a welcome development. I don't know that we can give all the credit to President Biden for making that happen, but rather, the fear, the absolute fear of some of these countries of being next. And indeed, a lot of them are NATO countries, as we mentioned, plus Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, just the other side of the Ukrainian border. So, yes, as the course of the war has gone on, some of the nature of the war has changed. So we were talking, for example, about the southern part of Ukraine, where the ports are blockaded, food can't get out, a world food crisis is in the making. That gave rise to the need of the Ukrainians for coastal defense, missiles, for example. The way that the Russians are prosecuting the war in the Donbass, for example, after failing with ground troops to take Kiev, is a standoff artillery barrage, as was done with Grozny, Chechnya, or Aleppo in Syria. So the nature of the war has shifted over these months, and the needs of the Ukrainian army, therefore, have also changed, at least somewhat, to now needing things like air defense, like self-propelled artillery, and as we've mentioned, coastal defense missiles, as well as things like UAVs, drones. But NATO and the United States have been extremely generous in providing a steady stream of weapons, ammunition, and intelligence to Ukraine. And I'll add one more thing to that list, and that's Elon Musk and his Starlink telecommunication system that he has put at the service of the Ukrainian government to assist them with their communications needs. It's been quite remarkable to watch.
Well, look, I agree with a lot of that, but on the other hand, we didn't provide the MiGs when it could have been, when Poland had them and was ready to give them. We said, go ahead and do it. And they said, here, you do it. We'll give them to you and you get, and they, well, no, we're not going to do that. And so there've been a lot of delays in getting Ukraine really what they wanted. And again, I bring up the fact that by still purchasing Russian gas and everything, we have the West has gone a long way to financing this, and where we tried to destroy the ruble, it's doing great now because of what Russia has done, and I'm just looking just on
Well,
July 7th. Yeah, let me July
Russia did
7th.
just default on its international debt for the first time in 100 years,
Okay,
on
well,
its sovereign debt.
yeah, well,
Um, you know,
and then the
go
next
ahead, go ahead.
question, though, let's wrap this one up, is, where do we go from here? What should the outcome be? I mean, to me, watching each of these cities be destroyed to rubble, and how many deaths we're going to end up finding there are in Ukraine. I understand. I mean, wouldn't a negotiated settlement, and I know it would mean giving up some land that they don't want to, that's theirs, be a more desirable solution to this
So,
than just
you know,
an endless war that we're paying for?
the United States gets invaded because we let Nazis march down the streets of Skokie, Illinois with their flags. And our cities are being pounded to rubble. Should we negotiate giving away, I don't know, the West Coast? I mean, maybe some people wouldn't mind seeing Oregon and California go. But that's sovereign territory of the United States of
Right.
America, just as parts of Ukraine are sovereign territory. What we're talking about is a globalist, empirical effort by the Soviet Union, by Russia, to recreate empire. China is watching very carefully with its eyes on Taiwan, how we of the free world of the West respond to the defense of Ukraine. We've briefly only mentioned the food crisis, but that's a whole nother area that affects the rest of the world. But the point here is, do we defend the Westphalian nation-state system of the world order, by which nation states are sovereign and their borders are inviolate unless they themselves threaten their neighbors with invasion? Or do we stop helping an innocent invaded country from being overrun by a neo-empire builder, Vladimir Putin? I mean, that's what we're talking about. And the monetary, the gas question, the Europeans, I mean, they really put themselves in a tough situation. It's their own fault. Germany has all kinds of nuclear reactors that it put into mothballs because it's, I don't know, not green or something. And they're the ones, the Germans are the ones under Angela Merkel, the former chancellor, and continued under Olaf Scholz now, that built the Nord Stream 1 and now Nord Stream 2 pipelines. Both of them, by the way, are now stopped. But Northern Europe has tough winters, real winters. Yeah. And they've got a limited number of months coming before they have to find new sources of energy if they're to stay warm this winter. So they're opening back up coal mining and calling it green. There, of course, are new supplies coming online. For example, natural gas out of Israel that will be refined in Egypt and then sent to Europe. I mean, the United States alone under, the Biden administration could, if it would, pump back up our own energy production and not only bring down the prices at the pump for us, Americans, but also have extra left over to help our European partners and allies. But Biden won't do it.
So I agree there, and that's where our policies and the policies of the West have really emboldened Russia to do what they're doing and that they're continuing to get the money. So let me point out one thing this shows is that we at the CCNS, where we agree on most things, there's a lot of very independent-minded thinking, and we're not going to all agree on everything. And that's one of the beauties of the CCNS. And you'll find that we put up all their points of view, even if they're not the view of the full body of the CCNS. I mean, we all agreed on Benghazi and everybody signed off on that, but some other issues aren't quite as unanimous in our thinking. So you brought up how this affects China's thinking about Taiwan. Don, you have a clip here that you can do, and we're going to move on to China and Taiwan here. Okay, so that refers to Taiwan pushing back as China has been sending planes basically in a threatening manner across the Taiwan Straits and over the country. And so we're seeing a lot of this. And they have recently demanded an end to U.S.-Taiwan military collusion, as they call it. So, yeah, and you look back, one of the worst blunders of the Biden administration was Afghanistan, which the way we left there was such a bonanza for China in so many ways. Bagram Air Force Base, 100 miles or so from the Chinese border. All the mineral wealth that they get access to now. And just the $85 billion or so worth of military equipment. It would have been nice. We could have left that for Ukraine instead of doing what we're doing. But and then plus it gave China the feeling that, hey, maybe this is the time to do our invasion of Taiwan, and then tie that in with so we've kind of extended our time. So why don't you kind of talk about, along with the death of Abe, the assassination, and based on his policies toward Taiwan and his views toward Taiwan and China, and tie it all together there for us, Claire. And we're see if we can keep this one a little shorter. And I'm not blaming you. This is great.
Okay. So a couple of days ago, when I first heard the news of the assassination of Japanese former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, it reminded me of nothing so much as Iran's operation to assassinate Ahmed Shah Massoud, the then leader of the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, which was fighting at that time against Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. His assassination just a couple of days before the 9/11 attacks. And what that assassination did, in my view, is took off the scene a key leadership figure of the Afghan forces, who would have unified those forces together with what everybody knew. Well, at the time, the Iranians certainly knew, Al-Qaeda knew, Taliban knew, would be a U.S. combined NATO response to the attacks of 9/11 in Afghanistan. And reminded of that, I wrote an article which was published at my Newsmax blog site just a couple of days ago. It's called "Abe's Death Heightens China Threat to Taiwan." Now, Abe was, in addition to being a former prime minister of Japan, he was a founder and key leadership figure of the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan, one of their parliamentary parties. And he had been very outspoken, certainly on the campaign trail in these past weeks, because Japan just held parliamentary elections. And oh, by the way, this is in the wake of Abe's assassination, swept the table. The Diet, the Japanese parliament, has a supermajority now for the Liberal Democrat Party, Abe's party, the party as well of the current Prime Minister of Japan, Fumio Kishida. But Abe had been outspoken about what he considered to be the direct China threat to Japan in the event of an invasion by Beijing of Taiwan. And if you think about the geography of the islands, there off of the Asian mainland, certainly the Japanese islands curving south, and a bit south of that comes Taiwan, and then there's Philippines, quite close together. And according to the May 14th leaked audio tape of the meeting in Beijing of senior CCP, Chinese Communist Party, and PLA, People's Liberation Army officials, China was preparing to move from a civilian stand to a war footing in the coming months to attack Taiwan, but also to clear the South China Sea of US and any other allied shipping, which would include Japanese. Well, Abe was talking about all of this, and he was urging Japanese leadership to move to a more robust, defensive armed posture. Since World War II, of course, Japan has had a much scaled down national defense force. Abe wanted that to be beefed up, to be more robust, because he saw an immediate and coming critical threat from China, even to Japan itself, and said that an invasion of Taiwan would be seen as a national security threat to Japan. In response, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman back in December of 2021 warned, quote, anyone who dares to return to the old path of militarism, meaning Japan, and defy the limits of the Chinese people will face a bloodbath, end quote. That was China's warning to Abe. He did not heed it. He kept on speaking. And in my view, that is why he was taken off the scene in preparation of the battlefield for what is to come in a Chinese eventual invasion of Taiwan.
So let me bring up how China and the Bidens are tied and what some of the implications are and where we see this. And for instance, last night, Tucker Carlson's show, the first half hour, was detailing all the things that have happened with China since Biden's come in. And Maria Bartiromo on her show on Sunday, they detailed, Miranda Devine. You see it on the War Room with Bannon. There's a lot of coverage of this other than at CNN, MSNBC, NBC, New York Times. They ignore this as if it's no kind of story at all. But what we know is how, and from Peter Schweizer's great reporting, how the Biden family has accepted over $30 million in deals with China, how they have canceled the China initiative, which was the way we were looking and trying to stop them from stealing our intellectual property. And so we recently, it was revealed that taking this oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, we've been shipping some of that oil to China. Again, I mentioned Afghanistan, what a bonanza it was for China. And there's really a lot more about, of course, the Wuhan virus and the failure to really investigate and hold them accountable for that, and how that is emboldening them to do this. And it just raises these, you talk about a scandal, if this was really covered the way it does, I feel it deserves to be. And that's where the media is a national security threat, because they won't even talk about this. They won't even acknowledge it. And of course, when Hunter's laptop came up before the election, and Leslie Stahl famously said, well, we're 60 Minutes and we haven't verified that, even though they all knew it. And the FBI held that laptop from December of 2019. So it is, China is just this growing power, threatening us in many ways. And we'll get into the way they are domestically, that you have, we did that event with you and Trevor Loudon, for it's also on our website here under events, where we looked at Antifa and BLM and how they are supported by these Maoist groups in China, and we have all these other things going on here with the Confucius Institute in all these colleges and all these professors that are placed here by China. So I know that's a lot that you could talk about there, but why don't you give your views
Well,
on what I
yeah,
just
sure,
talked
very
about?
quickly, and I know that we're out of time here, but I think the fundamental basic question is, to what extent is the President of the United States compromised, if at all, and or even being pressured, blackmailed, if at all, by an aggressive, expansionist, neo-empirical regime in Beijing? That's the bottom line. The questions that you mentioned, the terrific investigative reporting done by all of the above, Peter Schweitzer and Miranda Devine, and you know, so many more books by people like retired General Robert Spalding, both of whose books I've read recently, and so much other work. And now, of course, just in the last couple of days, the apparent hacking by this group called 4chan into Hunter Biden's iCloud iPhone storage and dumping these horrific, just unbelievable images onto the internet. We come back to the question, to what extent is our current American leadership compromised, not just the president and his family, but others in top leadership positions within the US administration and government at various levels, all the way on down to local? To what extent is all of that compromised by linkages, elite capture, as Peter Schweitzer calls it, by the Chinese Communist Party?
Okay, yeah, I mean, these are questions. How strongly do you feel that our president is compromised by China and how that is affecting our policy?
Well, we don't know. We don't know. We have an awful lot of evidence. We have an awful lot of investigative reporting. Again, Miranda Devine's book, The Laptop from Hell, testimony, interviews from people like Tony Bobolinsky. Obviously, Peter Schweitzer has done outstanding work on this. He wrote the book called Red-Handed. And then, of course, you know, these various leaks that have come out from hacking
Right.
or whatever, with these images, including, you know, very explicit images of documents and checks and things now shown online. Very serious congressional inquiry committee investigations need to happen as soon as the Republicans take control of the House and the Senate in elections this November, and then installed next January 2023.
Which leads, we could go more and more, but I'm going to finish with one topic. But what you just said brings up the whole question of election integrity and how many people don't trust the elections anymore, and in many cases with good reason. But what I'm going to finish on is we had another event this last week that could be a canary in the coal mine type situation. That is Sri Lanka. And this is a small country, fairly small, that is one of these countries that with the rising interest rates, and they are unable to pay their debts. And so then the president and prime minister appeared to did they abscond with the country's wealth? And how many other countries are about to face the same situation? And
Yeah,
so,
well,
yeah, go ahead.
right. So, I mean, I'll keep this super short, but I think what we're looking at in Sri Lanka is a harbinger of more to come. We mentioned the global food crisis that will be, at least in part, a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and blockading of its southern ports, through which Ukraine used to export its grain, in particular wheat, barley, and other grains, and cannot do so this year. Countries in North Africa in particular are going to be affected, also elsewhere in Africa, and we see already in Sri Lanka. There's going to be, and the United Nations itself has warned, there's going to be real hunger and starvation in the world. This is already taking place. The crisis is already reaching crisis proportions in Sri Lanka, where the government has fallen. The country is in a complete state of chaos and anarchy. I will mention Iran one more time, and that is that already 80% of the Iranian population, which numbers something like 85 or 86 million, 80% of that lives under the poverty line of $2 a day. The Iranians have been in the streets protesting for months and months. People don't pay attention, but this is going to happen on an increasing level, and these crises in these different places are only going to get worse.
Don, do you have that clip of Sri Lanka handy? Now there's an insurrection for you. Claire, you referred to it as a harbinger of things to come. And so we have covered quite a bit of the waterfront today, and you get an idea of the issues that we at the Citizens Commission on National Security plan to address and do our best both through the public marketplace of ideas as well as using our influence behind the scenes. Admittedly, we don't have as many contacts these days in the administration as we may have before, but we have some amazing people in our organization. Please take a look. Again, you see the website, ccnationalsecurity.org. This has been an incredible hour or so with Clare Lopez. Claire, I want to thank you so much. I want to encourage everybody, take a look, sign up, receive our newsletters. You'll see great articles. Take a look at our members and read their bios, and you get an idea of what we are and what we're doing and what we're trying to do, which is save this country. You know, there's a lot of people doing a lot of work in that direction, and we're doing our part and plan to do even more in the coming months and years. So again, Claire, it's been great spending this time with you and getting your views on all this, and look forward to doing it again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And with that, I think we'll wrap up this first episode of the National Security Alert. We'll be back next week with another one.